Well, how about C major scale? That should be in readiness at all times.
There are 24 major and minor scales in the Western tonal system, and if you want to master the violin, you're going to have every single one in your fingertips at any given time. I'm Tobias Murphy, and this is Murphy Music Academy. Of course, if you're finding yourself needing a little bit more personalized attention with scales, arpeggios, or really anything else in violin playing, then please shoot an email to admin@murphymusicacademy.org to set up an online trial lesson with myself or any one of our wonderful private teachers. And of course, if you're a returning viewer to this channel, then go ahead and hit that like button because you and I both know you're going to like the video and it really helps me in the algorithm. So one of the biggest challenges in teaching violin is that there's just too much. Just altogether too much stuff you have to learn to master the violin. And those of us that teach don't help matters by too often taking a non-systematic, throw you in the deep end sort of approach to violin teaching. For instance, if your approach to teaching scales is to just chuck a scale book at your student and tell them to practice it, then you are a terrible teacher. Instead, you must have a systematized plan that allows for the learning of new things and the constant revision of old things. Which leads us to the very best way to practice scales, the scale matrix. So how this works, as you can see, is we have each of the major and minor scales in its own grid. And you're going to start building your matrix with whatever key you put in this first grid here. Now I put B flat here because that is the lowest scale using the standard flesh scale fingering. But you can start your matrix with whatever key you want. So we're going to practice this scale until we've practiced it for a particular period of time or until we reach a particular condition like a speed on the metronome. And once we have reached that condition, we will then move on to the next scale following the circle of fifths, in this case, F. And we'll keep doing this, going to each new scale in the matrix until we have gone through all 24 major and minor keys. Now, this is a very normal way to go through the scale system, and I'm sure many of you have already done something like this already. What makes this different is how we use the grid to help us review and keep up with our old scales. At the end of your scale practice, with whatever scale you happen to be on for that week or that day, you're going to play through one of the older scales. Not practice, mind you, just play through. For example, let's say I move on to a new scale every single week. Now, I happen to be on D major at this point, which means I have 7 days in which I can also play G, C, F, and B flat. So on Monday, after I'm done playing D major, I will then just play through, not practice, but play through G major. And on Tuesday, I'll play through C, and Wednesday F, and Thursday B flat, and then Friday I'll go back to G, and so on and so forth, until I move on to the next scale, in which D will now be added to the review pile, and I'll repeat this whole process in the next week's scales. And you just keep practicing scales this way as you work your way through the matrix, which means you're going to be constantly playing through old scales every week, keeping them handily in your fingertips. Now that is the basics of how the scale matrix works, but let's talk a little bit now about how we practice scales, because if you're not practicing them properly, there's really no point in having all 24 scales at your fingertips if you're not going to play them well. Now, of course, probably the two most important things you should be focusing on are tone and intonation. But if you happen to be in the beginner or intermediate stages of learning scales, then you don't want to be just relying on your ear. But the problem with tuners is you can really only go so fast before the tuner can't really pick up the notes and tell you whether you're in tune or not fast enough. So the next best thing is to actually play with someone who knows what they're doing. Now, in years past, you wouldn't have been able to do that outside of lessons, but thankfully there are some pretty amazing programs on the internet that allow you to play through scales with professional level recordings. Now the recording I was just using, and I recommend you use, comes from Tomplay. They not only have recordings for beginner scales, but they also have more intermediate scales, the accompaniments to major pop songs, and even major violin concertos. They're constantly adding new scores and even have added things like the Wolfhard etudes that you can practice with. I'm incredibly excited to be sponsored by the best practice tool since the invention of the metronome, and they are having an amazing 40% off Black Friday sale for my viewers. Use my affiliate link in the description to get 40% off your yearly subscription and take your practicing to the next level. Anyway, this is the very best way that I have ever found to both practice, learn, and maintain your scales. Not only is it very simple and easy to follow, but it's also incredibly adaptable. Are you just learning scales for the first time? You can use this system. Are you practicing everything in the Flesh scale book? It works for that too. Now, one last very important thing. If you have the practice time, once you get past 7 scales in the matrix, then I would suggest doing 2 review scales every day. And once you get past 14 scales in the matrix, then I would suggest doing 3 review scales every day. That way you get through all 24 scales every week. And I would highly suggest that by the time you get to that point, you follow the grid vertically. This way, if you're practicing B-flat major, then you're also going to review B-flat minor. If you're reviewing E major, you will also review E minor. The reason you should do it this way is because it'll take a lot less time to practice more related scales. For instance, this is my scale matrix. I like to use sticky notes instead of the whiteboard. And if you look closely here, you'll see these little tabs on these particular scales. Those are the scales I'm reviewing, and the one right here in the middle is the one that I'm practicing for the day or for the week. And I do 3 octave scales, 3 octave arpeggios, thirds, octaves, fingered octaves, tenths, harmonics, and double harmonics for 4 scales every day, and it takes me a little bit less than an hour. So if you're not doing a lot of crazy double stop scales, it's going to take you a lot less time than that. There is probably not a single thing that will improve your playing faster than regular practice of scales, and now there is absolutely no excuse for you not to completely dominate them. I've been to Buy Murphy for Murphy Music Academy, and I want to hear back from all of you in a few months after you've spent time practicing scales with the scale matrix. I can't wait to hear how it's improved your scales and your overall playing. Happy practicing, and I'll see you next time.